Good morning, everyone. It's Mrs. Parry here with the next grammar workshop. Today's workshop is on clauses, and we are looking at clauses today within the context of our biography unit on Ernest Shackleton. So the examples that I choose will be linked to the Ernest Shackleton text that you are currently reading within this unit. Okay, in a moment, I'm going to go into the top right-hand corner of your screen and I will talk you through the PowerPoint. Okay, so we're looking today at clauses. You might be wondering why I've chosen a picture of Mobilo construction on this particular slide. Well, some of you might remember playing with Mobilo when you were in nursery or foundation, maybe even in year 1 and 2. I don't know whether you have any in your classroom. But when you build a Mobilo model, you use the little sections or bricks or cubes and you join them together with other cubes to make your model. So as we're going through this video, I want you to think about clauses as individual clauses within a sentence, as those individual bricks or blocks that you are building with. So each clause is like a Mobilo cube that you are joining with a connector to another cube which is like another clause within the sentence. So keep that image in your head and it might help you to understand, hopefully, what clauses are within sentences. Okay, moving on. So what is a clause? A clause is a group of words within a sentence that has a verb. Okay, so I want you to notice that a clause, whatever type of clause it needs to have a verb or a suggestion of a verb. Okay, so a verb that is suggested but it's been left out. So a clause is a group of words in a sentence that has a verb. Let's have a look at the different types of clause that there are. We have our main clause. We have a subordinate clause. And we have, did you guess it, a relative clause. Many of you will have watched the relative clauses video that we've already done. Okay, moving on. Main clauses. A main clause can be positioned anywhere in a sentence, but when it is taken out of the sentence, as if it were to have a capital letter and a full stop, it makes total sense on its own. It's sometimes called an independent clause because it can stand on its own independently and it makes sense on its own. For example, Ernest Shackleton was a famous explorer. This is a main clause. It has one main idea. It has a verb, which is was, and it makes sense on its own. A sentence can have more than one main clause. Let's have a look at an example. Ernest Shackleton was a famous explorer. Main clause number 1. Joined with one of those connection pieces. If you can go back to the Mobilo idea, you've got your main clause with your one brick, and then you've got your and, which is like those little connector pieces, and now it's joining on another main clause. He was one of the first men to successfully explore Antarctica. So both of those are main clauses because they make sense on their own, and they've been joined with the conjunction and, like the joining piece in the Mobilo model. Okay, moving on. Joining main clauses. Use coordinating conjunctions to join main clauses into sentences. So the joining pieces in a Mobilo model, these little red pieces in the diagram, the circular pieces that join the cubes together, I want you to think of these as the coordinating conjunctions. Okay, they are the conjunctions that join one main clause to another main clause, or they add a main clause into a sentence. So let's have a look at them. These conjunctions or joinings can be remembered by the acronym fanboys. Acronym just means one letter representing each thing that you want to remember. So let's have a look at what the coordinating conjunctions are. For. This particular for means like because, the word because. It's not the preposition for, like for my birthday. It's a very old-fashioned word, actually. It's like I am going to eat, for I am hungry. We don't really use it very often these days, so I don't tend to make much point about that one. I tend to think of it as one that we probably don't use nowadays. And I've done that in red because it's the most common coordinating conjunction. Nor. That's also quite an old-fashioned word, meaning also not. So I don't like eating fish fingers, nor do I like, I don't know, something else that you don't like eating. So it's a neither nor. But we don't tend to use that one very often either. It's quite posh and it's quite old-fashioned. So don't worry too much about that one in your own writing. It's quite rare that you would use that. But I've put that in red because but is an equally common conjunction. It's when you want to say the opposite of something. So I've put that one in red because it's one that you'll probably use. Or. That's when you're comparing things. That's also quite common, so I've put that also in red. Yet. It's also a negative one. I am hungry, yet I will have to wait till lunch. It's a bit like but less common in its usage. So I've thought about that as one that we probably won't use. So that's another comparison one. Something equals something else. I am hungry, so I will eat. So is quite a common one, so I've included that in red. So the coordinating conjunctions that you will probably use in your writing are the ones in red, and, but, or, so, and being the most common. Okay, so we use coordinating conjunctions to join a main clause to a sentence. Off we go. So now it's time for you to have a go at identifying some main clauses in these sentences. In a moment, stop the video, write these sentences into your books and see if you can identify just the main clause. Remember, it's not the additional information that's being added. It's just the main clause on its own. Off you go. Okay, let's have a look at the answers and see how you did. Number 1. Don't forget, we're identifying just the main clause. No additional information, no adverbials, nothing else. So, number 1. He was born on the 15th of February 1874. That's your main clause. It could be taken out of the sentence and it makes sense on its own. Number 2, Shackleton moved to Dublin. That's your main clause. Shackleton had a keen interest in unexplored parts of the world. That's your main clause. 16-year-old Shackleton joined the Merchant Navy. Ambitious Shackleton achieved the rank of first mate. All the additional parts of the information are additional pieces of information. They're either subordinate clauses or they are adverbials of time or place or manner. Okay, let's move on. Let's look at the next type of clause. So we've looked at main clauses. Let's look now at subordinate clauses. A subordinate clause is a group of words within a sentence that does not make sense on its own, and it adds meaning to the main clause. Okay, let's have a look at an example. Here's the main clause. He led the transatlantic expedition. That could be a main clause, couldn't it? Because it's one idea, makes sense on its own. It could be taken out of the sentence, have a capital letter and a full stop, and it would make sense as an independent clause. So we know that is the main clause. Now we've added a subordinate clause, devoted to creating a legacy. Does that make sense on its own? No. It depends on the main clause to make its total sense. So it adds meaning to the main clause. It does not make sense on its own. And we can notice there's also a verb there, which is creating. So it's a subordinate clause. A sentence can have more than one subordinate clause. So let's look again. He led the transatlantic expedition. That's the main clause within the sentence. Then we've added a subordinate clause at the beginning and a subordinate clause at the end. So devoted to creating a legacy, he led the transatlantic expedition starting on the 8th of August 1914. So those are the subordinate clauses. The first one needs to have a comma after it. Devoted to creating a legacy, comma, he led the transatlantic expedition starting on the 8th of August 1914. You only need a comma after the first because that is the fronted adverbial clause. And we know that after a fronted adverbial clause, you have to have the comma. Okay, moving on. Joining subordinate clauses. So this is again thinking about those joining pieces within the sentence. They're like the circular pieces that join the blocks together. So we're looking at how to join subordinate clauses within sentences. If you remember before, we looked at joining a main clause into the sentence. We used the fanboys coordinating conjunctions. Use subordinating conjunctions to join subordinate clauses into sentences. Let's look at them. There are many, but here are a few of them. These are the most common possibly, and if you can, it would be good to learn them so that you have them at your fingertips when you want to use them to join a subordinate clause into a sentence. I like to learn them in order and group together as I've done them, so that they act as a drop-down menu in your brain that you can just select from when you want to join a subordinate clause into a sentence. So let's have a look at them. If, when, while, and as. I've included these together because they're all sort of about when, aren't they? When I was doing something, while I was doing something, as I was doing something. They're all to do with time. Before and after, I've put those together because they're also time and they're opposites. Since and until, also subordinating conjunctions of time. Because, although, despite, and unless. They're all sort of reason conjunctions. So if, when, while, as, before and after, since, until, because, although, despite, unless. Try and remember them like a little song that you keep repeating to yourself, and then you can learn them quite easily. I'll go through it once more. See if you can do it with your eyes shut and join in. If, when, while, as, before and after, since, until, because, although, despite, unless, because, although, despite, unless. If, when, while, as, before and after, since, until, because, although, despite, unless. Okay, I know it's a bit funny, but it helps me remember them in my group, so it might help you also. So these are the subordinating conjunctions that help us to join a subordinate clause into a sentence. Okay, let's look now at the third type of clause that we're looking at, and that is relative clause. A relative clause, they're types of subordinate clause because they don't make sense on their own. They add meaning to the main clause. So they are subordinate, but they're called relative clauses. They begin with a relative pronoun, and it usually splits the main clause. So let's look again at the main clause. Ernest Shackleton was a famous explorer. That's your main clause. It makes sense on its own. Now let's look. Ernest Shackleton was a famous explorer. That's again your main clause, but as you can see, it's been split. It's been kind of bombed to the front and the back of the sentence, and into the middle has been placed the relative clause, beginning with the relative pronoun who, which is the one that we use when it's to do with the person. So Ernest Shackleton, who was from County Kildare in Ireland, was a famous explorer. So the relative clause has been popped into the middle of the sentence and it splits the main clause. Don't forget the commas. It needs to be cuddled by commas on either side of the relative clause. Try not to forget that. Okay, moving on now to creating multi-clause sentences. Multi always means lots of when it's used as a prefix. So, sentences can be single clause, just one clause, capital letter, full stop, one idea. There's nothing wrong with a single clause sentence. And in our writing, we often need to have a balance of a simple sentence, which is a single clause sentence, followed by a multi-clause sentence that adds lots of information. Okay, so sentences can be single clause, just one clause, or multi-clause, which is two or more clauses within the same sentence. Multi-clause sentences can contain more than one main clause and more than one subordinate clause. I'll say that once more. Multi-clause sentences can contain more than one main clause and more than one subordinate clause. So let's have a look at an example. Unsurprisingly, that's actually an adverbial of manner. Do you remember we looked at adverbials in your previous unit of work? It's not a subordinate clause because it doesn't actually have a verb in it, but it is an adverbial. It's an adverbial of manner. So unsurprisingly, now we have a main clause. Ambitious Shackleton achieved the rank of first mate. We know that's a main clause because it could be taken out of the sentence, have a capital letter and a full stop, and it would make sense as an independent clause on its own. Ambitious Shackleton achieved the rank of first mate. Then we have a subordinate clause, when he was 18 years old. Was is your verb. It adds information to when Shackleton achieved the rank of first mate. It's a subordinate clause. As you can see, it begins with the subordinating conjunction when. And so here we've got another main clause being joined by the conjunction, the coordinating conjunction and the second main clause is he became a certified master mariner. And we know that that is a main clause because you could put a capital H and have he became a certified master mariner, full stop, and that would be a simple sentence, a single clause, main clause sentence on its own. So that sentence, as you can see, has two main clauses. Ambitious Shackleton achieved the rank of first mate. He became a certified master mariner. They are both main clauses. It also includes a subordinate clause when he was 18 years old, and it starts with the fronted adverbial of manner, unsurprisingly. The only place we need the comma in that sentence is after the fronted adverbial, unsurprisingly. We must remember that we need a comma after a fronted adverbial. So, unsurprisingly, comma, ambitious Shackleton achieved the rank of first mate when he was 18 years old, and he became a certified master mariner. Full stop at the end of your sentence. I forgot to put mine in there. So, comma after unsurprisingly, because it is your fronted adverbial, and a full stop after the second main clause. Okay, moving on. Oh, we have another one there. Sorry, I forgot that was coming. So we have another adverbial at the end, which is an adverbial of time, and that is after 6 years. So let's read the sentence once more. Unsurprisingly, ambitious Shackleton achieved the rank of first mate when he was 18 years old, and he became a certified master mariner after 6 years. So as we can see, sentences are formed, multi-clause sentences can have several main clauses, they can have more than one subordinate clause, and they can also have adverbials of time, place, or manner. You have to make sure, though, that the sentence still makes sense. You can include too many clauses or adverbials within a sentence, and then you start to lose the sense of the meaning. So keep rereading your sentence and check that it still makes sense. Sometimes it's a good idea, you need a full stop and then you start another sentence. It's not always appropriate to write everything in one sentence. And don't forget, you need to punctuate your sentence correctly. Unsurprisingly, comma, ambitious Shackleton achieved the rank of first mate when he was 18 years old, and he became a certified master mariner after 6 years. Okay, now it's your turn to have a go at writing some multi-clause sentences yourself. So this is an activity. For this activity, you will need a sheet of A4 paper. Fold your piece of A4 paper into half, okay, half again and half again, so into 8 sections. Fold the creases carefully so that you can see the lines, and label each section as in the table below. So onto your sections that you have folded, you could draw lines down them so that they're nice and clear. Write main clause, do that 3 times, subordinate clause twice, relative clause twice, and then have 1 adverbial of manner and 1 adverbial of time. Cut out and fold each section. Okay, so once you've written your labels, you need to cut each section. Okay, and then fold each section up so you can't see what it is, and put the pieces on the table in front of you. So you should have 8 folded up little secret sections on your table. Pick out 2 pieces, but you need to ensure that at least one of them is a main clause. So if you haven't pulled out one that's the main clause, pop that one back and see if you can get a main clause plus one other. Try and write a sentence including the clauses or the adverbials you've selected with your pieces of paper. Try first of all with two pieces, remembering one of them has to be a main clause and then one other. Once you've managed to create a sentence that represents those two that you've drawn out from your pile, then try with three and then maybe with four pieces and see if you can keep adding those particular things into your sentences. Remember, they might be a main clause, might be two main clauses together, in which case you have to use your coordinating conjunctions to join them. It might be a subordinate clause and a main clause, in which case you have to use your subordinating conjunctions to join them. It might be, if you're doing three, you might have a main clause, a relative clause, and an adverbial of time perhaps. So you have to play around with them and see if you can come up with a correctly punctuated sentence that makes sense, that has those elements in it. Don't forget that to punctuate your sentence correctly with commas. A comma is needed after a fronted adverbial, and it needs to cuddle a relative clause also. Don't forget that if you have a subordinate clause at the beginning of your sentence, it's also a fronted adverbial and needs the comma after. Reread your sentence to check that it makes sense. Okay, I'm just going to show you an example. So I'm going to explain the process before you go back to that slide and do your own. So to help me, I wrote down on a list here my coordinating conjunctions and my subordinating conjunctions. Do that also, because it will help you when you come to add a main clause to a main clause. You need your fanboys, your coordinating conjunctions. And if you're adding a subordinate clause into the sentence, you will need to use your subordinating conjunctions. So write those down in two lists so that you've got them by your side. So these are the four that I drew out from my pile, my little pile of 8. I drew out subordinate clause, relative clause, main clause, plus main clause. So I started with 4 because I wanted to demonstrate that to you. Let's look at my example. Here's my modelled writing. Now, I started with just a simple sentence. So here I'm just going to demonstrate one simple sentence followed by my multi-clause sentence. So if you notice where the full stop is, my first sentence is separate from this activity. I wanted to give the idea of what my main clause was going to be about. So I wanted to write my multi-clause sentence about something about Shackleton being clever. So I wrote a simple single clause, main clause, one clause sentence first. Shackleton was a very clever man. So that's what my multi-clause sentence is going to be about, something about carrying on in the paragraph from him being clever. So you could have a go at that. Just write one idea first and then go into your multi-clause sentence. So now comes my multi-clause sentence, which I will talk you through. Do you remember my first card that I chose was, can you remember what it was? It was a subordinate clause. So I went to my list of subordinating conjunctions and I chose despite. So I need something that was a problem, because despite always explains a problem. So despite not enjoying school, that was my subordinate clause, because Shackleton didn't enjoy school. So despite not enjoying school, that is my subordinate clause. Now I wanted a relative clause, which he found unmotivating and boring. So I've added in my relative clause now, which he found unmotivating and boring. Remember, Your relative clause needs to be cuddled by commas. And then I had main clause. He was a prolific reader. And then I needed another main clause. So that's my first main clause. He was a prolific reader. Makes sense on its own. And now I use my coordinating conjunction and for my second main clause being added into the sentence. And he had a keen interest in finding out about unexplored parts of the world. So that is my second main clause. You can see the first main clause in green and the second main clause in green also. Okay, so let's read that multi-clause sentence once again and see if you can spot subordinate clause, relative clause, main clause plus main clause. Okay, I'll read it in one go. Despite not enjoying school, which he found unmotivating and boring, he was a prolific reader and he had a keen interest in finding out about unexplored parts of the world. Okay, that hopefully explains the activity. Don't forget, my single clause sentence at the beginning is just a sentence to kind of lead you in to the topic, as it were, of the multi-clause sentence. So it's like your first sentence in a paragraph, and then you go on to your multi-clause sentence that tells you more about that thing, that theme. So have a go now. I'll flick back through the slides and stop it. You stop the video, and then you can make up your own labels on the 8 sections of paper and have a go at creating some 2, 3, and even 4 multi-clause sentences by yourself. Okay, so stop the video now and have a go in your books and on your piece of paper, folding them up, creating your 8 sections, and then in your books writing some 2 clause, 3 clause, and even 4 clause, if you can, multi-clause sentences about Ernest Shackleton. Or if you struggle about writing them about Ernest Shackleton, you could practice writing some sentences about yourself. So have a go at writing some multi-clause sentences about yourself if you find it hard to remember the facts about Ernest Shackleton. Okay, off you go. I hope you enjoyed that video on clauses and that you were able to write some multi-clause sentences of your own. Bye for now.